Today is June 10th, 2009. I am Andrea Mott. It is a pleasure to conduct this interview for the Dakota Memories Oral History Project in Streator, North Dakota. Can you please state your full name?
Raymond Erbele.
And Raymond, can you please share some of your earliest memories with us? What's the earliest thing you remember?
With you?
When you were little.
My recollection of my very earliest time in life would be living in an older home. I remember a home without electricity. I remember a home without any of the modern conveniences, with no bathroom facilities as such. Heating water for baths, and I have memories of that, and I guess consequently, because of having memories, I appreciate the standard of living that we enjoy in this day and age.
And Ray, what was it like growing up on the plains?
It was extremely, how would I say that, extremely private, so to speak. There was, as long as you stayed on the farm, the only people that would come around would be probably neighbors, and those were usually relatives. And I remember visiting neighbors as a young person in a team of horses and a wagon or a sled, and we never had phones, so we didn't know if they'd be home or not. And so in the course of the evening, I remember in the wintertime, we'd kind of cup our hands over the window and see if we could see a little flicker of light, which meant they were at home, and we would head out across country in a sleigh and team of horses and go visit. And usually at the other end was homemade ice cream and cookies and all of the goodies that were just part of the everyday routine that people would prepare. And in the wintertime, homemade ice cream was a special thing, because in the wintertime, we were all milking cows and had cream and eggs and things like that to drum that up at a moment's notice. And of course, it was a hand churn, and so that was always an interesting thing. And all of the ladies back then each kind of had their own recipe, so it never tasted the same wherever you went.
And what did you find beautiful or enjoyable about growing up on the plains?
I like the outdoors from very early childhood. I always enjoyed nature, and I guess one of the things as you get older and as you reflect the four seasons and all of the beauty that all of those seasons bring, I've appreciated those from early childhood on, that there's always so much variety in each season, and so much that's unique about each season in this part of the country.
We'll start with the seasons. What were the winters like?
Winters always in this part of the country have been, I guess a good word I would use for that would be challenging. And even in the modern world in which we live, we have ways of handling things with tractors and equipment that we didn't have back then, but they're still challenging in the fact that livestock needs to be fed, and snow needs to be moved and things like that. And I remember my early childhood years of when hay wasn't moved into the home quarters close by, where we would hook up a team of horses on a bobsled and a hay rack and head out across country and pitch the hay on by hand. And the winters where the snow was deep, we'd have to sometimes dig the hay out with a shovel and then throw it up on the snowbank, and from the snowbank up onto the hay rack, and then take it home and feed it to the livestock. And the only hay we had around was the hay that we put up in the hay loft on top of the barn in the fall of the year. And so the outside livestock was just fed from hay that was left out where it was stacked during the course of the summer months. So a lot of physical, difficult things, but have memories of that, where we would huddle into the hay then and drive the team of horses home across country, and with my dad and brother, and later on my younger brother would be a part of that as well, but not as much, because by the time he came along, we were starting to do more things with tractors and things like that. And I have very vivid memories of the team of horses being trained to just slowly walk through the cow yard, and we'd pitch the hay off, and the cattle would come and eat it then. And it was, I guess, one of the things that you reflect on as you think about how we did it then. There was only the clinging of the tugs on the horse harness. There was no tractor motor. There was, if it was a quiet, peaceful morning, to be amongst the livestock with no motors running and any of those things, today you appreciate that more than ever as you reflect back on that.
And what were the springs like? What was a typical spring?
Typical spring, we all look forward to after a hard winter. The cows would be calving, and there would be all kinds of new life. And sometimes I remember our mares having colts and things like that. It was an exciting time. You wondered what the new baby calves were going to look like. You wondered what the new foals were going to look like, and the excitement of getting going with doing some field work and planting a new crop again. And so the variety of what farm life entailed from the early on that I have memories of was always an air of excitement because of the newness that spring would bring.
And what about the summers? How did that transition?
Oh, the summers, they were exciting for us, because at that point when summer was here and the grass was green and we'd move cattle out into pasture and things like that, it meant that we didn't have to feed the livestock anymore, and that was a change of pace for us, and they would be self-sustaining for the summer months into the early fall months before they needed to be brought back home. And the gathering in of the crops, the harvest, that was always a good time. And of course the years where there was a bountiful harvest was always seemed much more rewarding and exciting than when you'd come through a year where there was drought and it was lean and things like that. But we always had a garden. Mom would water the garden with buckets to make sure that we had food and canned goods and things like that for the winter months that lie ahead. And
what about a typical fall?
well, fall would be the time where we would think about filling the hayloft. In my childhood years, we'd focus on that, and we would also focus on digging potatoes by hand and getting them downstairs into a dark, cool room, and just a lot of things that would go on in preparation for winter. Corrals and barns cleaned, and just culmination of the summer's activities and preparations made for what we always knew was usually going to be a long, hard winter.
And what did you find bleak or maybe unpleasant about growing up on the plains?
I think that if there is a bleakness, it would be the days where we'd probably have snowstorms, sometimes 2-3 days at a time, and it seemed like the whole world stopped. And I remember, though, Mom would always make something that would create something that would make it seem like there was going to be light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. She would get going with baking bread and kuchens and rolls and things like that, and fixed favorite foods, and we would play games with brothers and my sister and things like that. And what seemed bleak about it turned out to, it was as bleak as you made it be.
And what was your favorite season?
My favorite season was the summer. As a child, in my early childhood years, it meant that I was going to be able to do things with tractors, machinery, and equipment. And as I grew older, I was able to do more and more things, and that was exciting. It was rewarding, and I guess because of that, I'm in production agriculture today yet.
Is there anything you miss about that?
In those early childhood years, I guess the thing that I miss is probably the slower pace by which we did things. It seems now the inputs and the demands are so great that sometimes you feel there's a lot of pressure because of high input costs and things like that. The dollars that you have to generate just to stay afloat and to be able to be a viable operation.
Now, when you were younger, what would you have considered your most stressful childhood experience?
My most stressful childhood experience would probably be, times where Dad would be gone for probably longer than what I thought he should be to go to town to tend to business and things like that, and the insecurity of wondering if he's okay and if he's going to get back okay and things like that. I used to get stressed out over that if it got to be longer than usual. And of course, there weren't cell phones, there weren't phones or anything like that. You would just hope that everything would be okay. Those were things I remember as a little boy wondering what's happened or is everything okay. And so those were insecure moments, and probably nothing unusual, just normal, because our family ties were close, and when everybody was home and was safe, it was peace of mind.
And how often would he go to town?
Oh, it depended on the season of the year. I would say on an average of maybe once a week.
And how long was that trip?
Oh, the trip into town was probably a half hour, something like that. Maybe if he was using the truck or something like that, it'd be a little bit longer than that. But then there was a big round of activity and business he needed to tend to. So depending on what hour of the day he left, would take him into the evening hours or something like that, and would create some concern in the wintertime with it getting dark early. And of course, somehow darkness always creates a shadow of doubt and concern, and probably a little more fearful than during the daylight hours.
And in contrast, what would you consider your happiest childhood memory?
Oh, I guess the happiest childhood memories would be the anticipation of the holiday seasons. My mom used to make all kinds of preparations for that with baking goodies, and I remember there was always a stash of candy and nuts that she would put into the attic long before the holiday season got to be there, and sometimes my brother and I would discover that before the appropriate time, but those were happy memories of the excitement of the holiday season and the celebration of the importance of it. My parents ingrained in us very, very firmly that the holiday season was a special celebration, and the birth of the Christ child and all of the activities that were special focused around that. And we'd be involved in Christmas program at church and things like that. And pretty special time, and still is today for us.
And what kind of Christmas programs did you do as a child?
We had Christmas program at the school, even in country school. And at church, of course, there were musical selections that we had to learn. We had to memorize various Christmas type or oral type things that told about the Christmas story and its importance, and that we were expected to memorize, and those were special memories as well.
What about the other holidays? What would you do for those? How would you celebrate Easter?
Easter was always a special time too, and of course our focus on being in church was important, and we'd have family get-togethers, and probably go visit the grandparents or an uncle and an aunt, and it was just a special time, and the reflections of the importance of the occasion was also emphasized. And I think Thanksgiving too, my mom was a great food preparer, and we always had a special kind of Thanksgiving day as well, and lots of food and lots of preparations made, and that good reflections and good memories of that.
Now, what was the most adventurous thing you did during your childhood?
An adventurous thing? As just an individual or as a family, or?
We can start with individual and we can go to family.
Oh, I don't know. I guess probably the most adventuresome thing I ever did was probably take my horse and go up into the hills all by myself, which seemed like a big undertaking and I probably worried my mom an awful lot about doing things like that, and but I had a trusty little horse that I knew would take me where I wanted to go, and having done that, I felt that I had really reached a milestone, that I could actually be up in the hills and ride through the cows and check the cows on my own without having Dad or a brother there, and that seemed like a big deal.
And now you mentioned group adventures. What kind of a group?
Well, the group, my brother and I mean, what he didn't think of, I did, and so we would come up with various things. And a lot of times what we did together was on horseback, where we would do different things, and out in the pasture we would, there are still Indian rings where Indians had teepees and circles and things like that, and at different times we were on the hunt for Indian artifacts and things like that, and we did ultimately come up with a collection of some Indian arrowheads and things like that, and Indian hammers, and so those kind of things were kind of fun, that we knew that those who occupied the plains before did leave some remnants behind and left proof of it, and that was exciting, and tried to envision what that was like when they occupied that area at one time.
Was it hard to imagine?
Yeah, it was hard to imagine how they survived and existed, and had to depend on wildlife and buffalo and different things like that. And as you studied about the Native Americans in history and so on, you would kind of sit there even in school and take you right out to where their teepee rings were in our pastures and things like that, and wonder just what was that like when they had to try to survive the North Dakota winters.
Is there anything else about your childhood memories that you would like to add? Any other adventures? Did you ever go trapping, or did you hunt any of the animals in the area?
Yeah, my brother and I, of course, we would do gopher hunting, and we would trap gophers, and then we'd also get involved in snaring gophers. That was simply taking some baler twine, or as we called it back then, binder twine, and make a loop, and a gopher stick his head out of the hole, we'd snare him. And we also, in the winter months, would trap muskrats, and we kind of tried to generate a little income from selling those. And
how much would you get for those?
Usually around the neighborhood of 60, 70 cents a piece, which back then seemed like awful big money, and we thought if that pattern continues, we could become wealthy. And so, yeah, we every season we had some special things that we would do that made life interesting.
So life was always going on the farm. There was always something.
Always. The seasons just bring different activity, and that's the fortunate thing in this part of the country. The seasons are so distinct that there's always a change of activity and so much variety that if you were bored, it was your own fault.
Do you notice the difference between weather now and weather the environment when you were younger?
Yeah, after you come through a winter like we just had, you think, we're going to get back into the old days. It seemed the winters were much more severe back then than they are now, but you say that with tongue in cheek after with what we just came through this past winter, but it seems we had a lot more blizzards back then that would block roads and just totally immobilize us. And of course the other thing that you need to factor into that is that we didn't have nearly the equipment to help ourselves either that we do nowadays. And we seem to be more in extreme weather pattern now than what we were back then.
And sort of in conclusion, why do you think it's important to tell your life story?
Well, I guess it's important to tell these things, and I know my kids probably kind of laugh at me once in a while, but I really think the stories need to be told and retold of what was once and what is now, and how over time we have improved in our standard of living. And it didn't come easy, and I think it's a reflection on perseverance, it's a reflection on hard work, and to have goals and ambitions, and we can ultimately change our destiny in life, so to speak, if we have enough of all of that.
And it really tells us something about the people who came before us.
Absolutely. And I think that's so important if we stop and think about how those people that originally came here and settled the area, like our grandparents, for example, and what lifestyle they had and what lifestyle we have in the same area, on the same soil types, doing the same thing that they did, only on a larger scale and a much more sophisticated scale. But they were the forerunners of that, and we should never belittle that. And their perseverance, their dedication, their determination left us a rich heritage, I think.
And are there any other observations or thoughts that you would care to share?
Oh, I guess I try to live so that, knowing that we never have a chance to relive this day, I try to live it so that I've left it a better place.